Hi, and welcome to today's broadcast. Before we begin, there are a few pieces of information to go over. In order to receive CPE credit for this program, you'll need to document your participation. You will see letter codes appear in the form of a graphic on your screen several times throughout the course, and you will need to capture every code in order to be issued credit. As each letter code appears, write it down, then enter it in the appropriate code submission box and click Submit. Remember to click Submit one final time at the conclusion of the program as well. You will then be issued a certificate documenting your attendance and credits earned. If you have a question at any point during the broadcast, you may submit it in the questions box. We will try to answer your question as soon as possible. Should you run into any technical difficulties, submit your codes, then try refreshing the page. If your problems persist, please call us at 973-226-4494. This broadcast is being recorded and will be available on our website shortly after its conclusion. Enjoy!
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to this special edition of IssuesWatch Live. If you have a colleague who couldn't make today's broadcast, we'll be replaying it twice in the coming weeks. The dates and times are on your screen. If you have any questions at any point during the broadcast, we invite you to submit them in the questions box on your screen. We'll try to address questions submitted during the live broadcast. Questions submitted during a replay will be answered within 24 hours. I also encourage you to listen to and subscribe to our Issues Watch podcast, which is hosted by me. Every other Tuesday, I provide updates on happenings in Trenton and interview business decision makers and public policy experts. Listen in on your favorite podcast app or follow the link on your screen. Today we're going to take a deep dive into several components of Governor Murphy's proposed budget for New Jersey's next fiscal year. I'm joined by Dale Florio of Princeton Public Affairs Group. Dale is considered one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey, and he and his firm have been working for the NJCPA for about 22 years now. And Richard Keevy, Distinguished Executive in Residence at the Rutgers School of Planning and Public Policy. He's also a lecturer at Princeton University. Rich brings a real unique perspective to this discussion because he served as New Jersey's budget director and comptroller under two different governors. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Jeff.
Good to be here, Jeff.
We're coming to you today live from Trenton. We're in the offices of Princeton Public Affairs Group, and we thank them for hosting our broadcast today. You may hear some background sounds from the hustle and bustle of Trenton. We're just across the street from the State House. So let's do a quick budget overview. Here's some background information. The budget is, the proposed budget is a $38.6 billion budget, which is a 1.7% increase over the current budget of $38 billion. The budget includes $1.1 billion in cost savings, a $3.8 billion payment to the pension plan, and a $1.2 billion surplus. There's also an expansion of the millionaire's tax to everyone making $1 million or more. There's also several changes to the corporate tax incentive programs to shift more to startup and small businesses. And there's a cap on all the programs combined at $400 million. The process of passing the budget, for those of you who don't know, works something like this, or exactly like this. The governor issues his budget proposal, then it goes to the legislature for their review. The legislature must finalize an Appropriations Act by June 30th, and the governor needs to sign it by June 30th. The governor can sign the bill, veto it, or issue a line item veto where he can cut spending and take things out, but he can't put anything in. We surveyed our members this month about what they think of the proposed budget and what its impact will be on the state's economy over the long term. 70% said this budget will make the economy marginally or significantly worse. Only 12% said that it will have an impact of making it marginally or significantly better. This budget has been labeled by the governor as a blueprint for the middle class, and that it will bring economic fairness to New Jersey. This is how the governor started his budget speech.
Our license plates say New Jersey, the Garden State. But even more than that, New Jersey is the middle class state. We are all in this together, and coming together is how we succeed. So today I am presenting a budget that is a blueprint for how we continue to build a more secure and inclusive middle class in New Jersey.
So, Dale, I'm going to start out with you. Here's my first question. When I was watching the governor's budget address, I noticed he used the term middle class more times than I could count. Any idea what the governor means by the middle class, like what kind of income range, how he defines it in his head? And do you think this budget is good for the middle class?
So it's really less about what one man thinks the middle class is than the people that are listening to the message, because I think most people in New Jersey think that they're in the middle class. So I think it's hard for any elected official, and I know that it's very, people believe the middle class is getting squeezed, but there's probably a greater gap in people thinking that they're in the middle class than probably what the governor's thinking. I'm guessing he's thinking about anybody that makes less than $75,000 a year, raising a couple kids and trying to get them through school. But I can tell you that I think most New Jerseyans, many of whom are way above 75, believe themselves to be in the middle class.
Right. Rich,
I don't disagree with that. I would just observe that I don't think there's anything specific that's going to particularly impact the middle class. And the governor may be thinking about, he recently increased the minimum wage to $15, which definitely will help the middle class, in my opinion. There's some money in the budget that will go to state aid to theoretically reduce property taxes, but that's affecting everybody. Middle class, lower class, upper class, so to speak. So my general view is there's nothing specific and definite in this budget that's going to significantly better the middle class.
And I would just add to that in addition to the minimum wage, we saw a paid sick leave program now. The legislature and the governor got together on an expansion of the paid family leave. They basically doubled it. I think it went from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. So those are things that really focus on the middle class, separate and apart from this budget proposal.
Okay. Rich, this next question is for you, since I know you're a numbers expert and have a real lot of experience with state budgets. Every year as the lawmakers struggle with the budget process, I always hear people from the executive branch and lawmakers say, well, there's really very little fat on the bone, and there's very little we can cut. And then they point to the fact that, all the income tax revenue has to go to property tax relief, and then there's billions of dollars that have to be spent on items like infrastructure so that they can receive federal matching funds. So is this true? I mean, is there really no major cuts that can be made to the state budget without, causing chaos?
Well, I'll sound like a homer when I respond to that answer, or a former budget director. There's always something that can be reduced in the budget. I think what we're talking about, however, is there something significant that we could get rid of that would give us opportunity to spend it on something else or to give money back to the taxpayer. And in my judgment, there's not that much. I think you touched upon it, almost 47% of all money that the state collects goes back to the local governments, principally school districts, for reduction of the property tax. There's another 11% that go to grants that leave the state government, fund programs like homestead rebates, the higher education system, Medicaid programs. Only about 22% of the budget actually is spent by the state government. Two other points I would want to make. And that is, most people think that the state budget is the one that's eating up all the money. Did you know that 75% of all spending in this state is at the local levels?
Yeah.
Not by the state
that.
government.
Yep.
$30 billion almost every year is collected from the property tax. Together with the income tax that comes back, that's where the spending is done in the state of New Jersey. So if we're going to make any substantive changes in cutting spending, one might want to look at school districts,
Right.
municipalities, and counties as opposed to the state government. One other point, if you look at the last 10 years, we've lost, if you want to use that verb, 16,000 state employees. We have less on the payroll than we did before. So over the last two administrations, Corzine and Christie, thanks, how could I forget, have significantly reduced the payroll costs.
Right.
So that's good. So I'm a little skeptical about folks who say we can cut the budget and save money.
Okay. And by the way, with federal spending, we're talking about New Jersey spending over $100 billion in dollars.
Well,
right?
I guess a little
Government
tricky there. You know, the state budgets, as you indicated in the beginning, is $38 billion or so. That doesn't include any federal dollars.
Right.
There's
right.
another $16 billion that comes into the state government. So if you
Okay.
looked at the budget in totality, you'd get the 38 plus 16 plus some others.
Right.
So that's what I would call the state budget.
Okay.
There's other things going on in the state by various authorities, the Turnpike Authority,
Yeah.
the Water Authority, but I think it's best to look at the state budget as an entity to itself.
Okay, let's move on to another topic, one that seems like it's been in the news forever, and I mean a decade or more, and that's pension and health benefits for public employees. New Jersey has approximately $150 billion unfunded liability for its pension and health benefits for public employees. The proposed budget includes a $3.8 billion payment to the pension fund. Combined with health benefits, this comprises about 22% of the budget. This is expected to rise to about 27% by 2023. Here's what the governor had to say about that.
We will responsibly invest in meeting our pension obligation and continuing the progress to bringing the pension funds back to health with a second straight record-setting payment, this year's totaling $3.8 billion. We cannot look for quick outs or easy fixes because they simply don't exist. It took us years to get to this point, and it will take years of good faith efforts that must include our public employees, our educators, and our first responders to successfully get past it. And that's why we are making this record $3.8 billion pension contribution, to keep our promises and to meet our fiscal challenges head on.
Gentlemen, in addition to the large pension payment that the governor announced, he also announced $800 million in cost savings from making changes to the health benefit policies for public employees. Dale, I know we spoke about this a couple of days ago. Are those numbers real?
Well, this ties back to what Rich was talking about before in terms of the budget and how much of it is defined and fixed, if you will. The political debates actually since probably late in the Corzine administration, when the economy nationally went down, before that time we used to, as lobbyists, we would go in and clients would say, see if you can get me $1 million for my firehouse. We used to call it Christmas
trees.
Christmas in June. Well, that went away, and we haven't returned to that since the 08, 09 downturn. So what you have now is a situation where we haven't gotten out of that, and the pension absorbs so much of the political discussion, along with some of the other key items that the governor wants to talk about. And I guess we'll talk about the millionaire's tax as well. But in terms of the pension and the savings that he's talking about, $800 million, there's a lot of conversation about what's really in that number, right? Now the budget in detail is out, and Rich might be able to shed some light on this, but and the governor recently announced a 4-year contract with the CWA. But I think I've detected a lot of skepticism, by the legislature in terms of if that's a real number.
Right.
We hope it is. And you've also heard legislators from both parties now talking about the need to, well, if there's 800, there's probably more. And that, along with the prescription plan, is going to get a lot of attention this next couple months.
Right.
Let me add a couple points. You know, when people, you got to make sure we distinguish between pension problems and health benefit problems. Now, the pension system, you know, has been totally underfunded for several years, mostly because prior governors didn't put the proper amount in for one reason or another. So we're looking at today a shortfall, even though the governor has put in 3.8. If he was fully funding the pension system, he would have had to put in $6 billion. So that's problem number one, is how do we address that over a long period of time. Second issue is the health benefits, which is also a big eater up of state dollars. And actually, if you look at the numbers, the reduction was only $500 million. You have to look a little bit carefully as to how he phrased that. It's over a couple-year period of time. So $500 million is a good start, but it's also only negotiated with the CWA, not the teachers. And as you may or may not know, the majority of the pension money goes for school districts. So the larger nut to crack is not only with the state pension system, but also with the teacher pension system, because the state funds all of the teachers' pension system for retirees. The state funds all the retired teachers' health benefit system, and the state funds the Social Security contribution. So it's a multi-part task. The governor's made a good attempt at doing this within the resources that he has. My judgment is we need to do something more fundamental to the pension system.
Right, and that gets right into my next question. You know, the CPA Society is we think this cutting $800 million, assuming that that's what it comes to, we think that's a, you know, a good move. I think it's the first time I've seen in a long time any kind of cuts. And we think it's a good first step, but we think a lot more needs to be done, and that doesn't really dent the whole problem very much. So, and I know you served on the Economic and Fiscal Policy Review Commission. What kind of major reforms can be made that you think are practical and doable?
Well, in those two areas, what we were suggesting in the health benefit areas, that we move from the platinum top-notch health benefit plan down to a gold standard. That would be in addition to what the governor's proposed, and would probably save us another 15% above against the total health benefits.
Right.
So we have a very generous health benefit plan, not only for current employees, but for retirees. We're much better than most states in terms of the benefits provided. So we think that's an opportunity for some reduction. In the pension side, what was recommended by our commission was that we only address new employees. So if you're a current employee or an existing retiree, there would be no change to the pension system. But if you were a new employee, they would not go into a defined benefit system. They would go into something called a cash benefit system, which is like a hybrid or like a 401k. And there's another option, while I'm on it, a hybrid. In other words, for the first, pick a number, first $40,000, the person would be in the defined benefit system or defined contribution, and then would go into a 401k. And that would save money over a long period of time. Because when you look at the numbers, we're going to come up short by at least $3 billion over the next few years. That would be the gap between revenues and what we need to fund.
To make the payments.
So we need to figure out a solution to this, because I don't think anybody would think that we can grow out of this problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, that leads me right into my next question, which is maybe more political than a numbers thing, and that is, do you think the governor is eventually going to have to accept cuts to his spending programs in order to fund all these pension payments, which are just going to grow, you know, each year? Because it would seem to me it's either he cuts some of those in order to pay for the pension payments, or he has to raise taxes. So you're a political guy. How do you see that playing out? Because I would imagine he obviously has a constituency, you know, on the union side who don't want to see any cuts, and then he's got a constituency, you know, with all these various programs. So how do you see that playing out, or is there another option that he can do that I'm missing?
Well, I'm not sure there are many options. quite frankly. It's really the political will. I think you could talk to any of the career people at the Department of Treasury, and they've heard about just every solution. And there are a number of solutions, but it's the will to make the changes. I think that the cap we see on the budget, you know, the governor delivered a $38 billion budget, that's going to be the cap. And I think the legislature will move some things around underneath that cap and go from there. Right now, it's very unlikely he would get the millionaire's tax, which he needs to provide the savings that he's talking about and pay for some things. But I just don't see that happening at this time.
Well, what about? I'm even thinking further ahead, like 3 years from now, when the idea what he wants to do is raise the pension payment every year. I think I said before, in 2023 we go from 22% of the budget for the pension and the health benefits up to 27%.
So the politics come back into play there. I don't think the legislature would hesitate to do more in terms of making a pension payment, but they're going to want to see some, whether you want to call them givebacks or other savings. And the Senate President has been going around the state, and Rich has been, provided some input to his path to progress, and he lists a number of items in there.
Right.
So I think as long as the Senate President feels strongly about those things, he's going to want to see the governor take a look and see if the governor will incorporate some of those changes before the legislature then will come forward with more money for the pension or any of the other programs.
So he may eventually be forced to reform some of them.
Let me just add a little bit onto it. As I mentioned before, if you project down for the next 5 years and take a normal progression of revenue increases and a normal progression of existing expenditures, and you were going to try to fund the pension system, you'd come up with a gap of anywhere between $3.5 and $4 billion. Some people would argue, maybe the governor would argue, I'm not sure what the governor would say, how he would handle it. We're going to grow our way out of this.
Right.
We're not going to grow our way out. In fact, we may even suffer some revenue losses.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do is do something to the pension system to reduce the cost for new employees coming in, and we need to change the health benefit system. And this might be an anathema. We still might need more revenues.
Right.
But we can't ask, I think, the public for more revenues unless we can fundamentally change these two big albatrosses around the state budget, health benefits and pensions.
And we actually have a question from Michael, and this plays right into this, and I'm sure you'll have a good answer to this, or the right answer.
Maybe.
Why does New Jersey, I might even have the answer to this, why does New Jersey keep offering pension benefits to new hires? And I guess that's really more of a political question, maybe. I mean, in other words, why aren't they switching them to 401ks? And I think it gets back to what you guys just said. That's a reform that's needed, but Yeah,
well, that is what, if you will, what Senator Sweeney proposed in his plan, and the group that I was part of. That if you look out, we can't get to the funding of that, and therefore we don't want to have these huge unfunded situations that would ultimately lead to a problem of people not getting a pension. So let's stop giving the pension system to the new employees. So I agree with the gentleman there, but that's going to take a lot of political will, and it's going to be very difficult to do.
Right. Let's move to what may be the most controversial issue as far as fireworks between the legislature and the governor, and that's the millionaire's tax. This is one of the most contentious issues in the governor's budget. After he announced that he was going to extend or expand the millionaire's tax to $1 million and over, and currently it's just $5 million and over, the Senate President and the Assembly Speaker immediately announced that they were adamantly opposed to it. Last year's budget implemented this 10.75% tax rate on those earning more than $5 million. This affected about 1,500 people in New Jersey. The new proposal would impact 19,000 New Jerseyans and another 19,000 non-residents who would now be subject to this higher tax. It's estimated to bring in $475 million. And this is where a long-standing debate comes into play Opponents of the tax say that it will increase out-migration to states with lower taxes, especially amongst, upper middle class and wealthier people. And they say this will be on top of what's already a dramatic out-migration. Those who favor the millionaires tax say, all this talk about out-migration due to taxes, it's a myth. They're going to Florida because it's warm. And they actually claim, the latest claim I heard was that New Jersey has 1,000 more millionaires than they did 10 years ago. Both sides circulate position papers, studies, graphs that imply that they're right. So here's my first question. Do you think, I'll start with you, Dale, is there really an out-migration problem? Are New Jersey's high taxes driving people out of the state?
We have an image problem, for sure, without a doubt. And I know we'll talk about probably the incentives that the governor would like to cap, but whether that happens or not, it's now added to the mystique that New Jersey isn't necessarily
a good place,
friendly place to be.
Yeah.
I mean, we put out some recent numbers where high schools are graduating a higher number of kids than in any other state, but we're not keeping those kids here, right? We're losing those kids because it's expensive here. So the millionaire's tax, it's a catchy name to use,
right?
But the lower you go, and your audience, we got a lot of CPAs listening in here. They know that a small business person to get to $1 million isn't that difficult to do, and that's what drives our economy here. It's not the big corporation,
right?
It's the small people, and when you start to get to $1 million, you're affecting a lot of people that have a lot to say about how our economy is going to respond in the future.
Right, and I would just add to that, we did a survey a year or two ago, and about 75% of our members who responded said that they have actually told a client or more clients that they should leave the state, that they had a fiduciary duty to tell them where they stood financially and that they would be better off going to another state. Now, Rich, what do you think about the out-migration?
Well, the first thing I would say is that's not very good advice. To suggesting that our citizens... Well, New Jersey has more millionaires per capita than any other state in the country. That's a fact, based upon research that was done. I don't know, picking up on Dale's point, whether there's more coming in or going out. When I was running an institute at Princeton University full-time, we did a study on this, and it showed the opposite, that people were increasing in the millionaire category.
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey. But that was 6 or 7 years ago. Events have changed. Plus, it's never clear as to what group of millionaires are leaving.
Right.
Are they the 1 million or are they the 15 million?
Right.
So I really don't know what the total impact is of the shuffling back and forth. I'll just make another personal observation. I believe if we address the overall budget problem, we need to look at it over a longer period of time. And we may have to have a millionaire's tax of some level.
Mm. Well, and you know what's interesting, with the millionaire's tax and with a lot of different programs and taxes, they never seem to mention the future value of the dollars. In other words, sure, there's going to be more millionaires now in New Jersey compared to 10 years ago. I mean, some of that is just because they've, with inflation, their incomes have grown, and now they're in the millionaires class. So, of course, that's hard to quantify. Dale, do you expect a huge fight in the legislature over this issue? I mean, it's either they pass the millionaire's tax and the governor, gets his $475 million and everything is fine, or they don't and he's got a huge hole and he is sort of, put his stake in the ground on this millionaire's tax. So you think they're going to come to some sort of compromise, or they're going to fight over this?
I always like to watch when governors deliver speeches, the budget speech, because then you can look at the two people sitting behind them. So you had the Senate President, and you had the Speaker, and I saw very little applause, even though they're of the same party. Saw very little applause for a lot of the major components of the governor's budget. That's a telltale sign. You don't have to be a registered lobbyist to figure that out. So, and I think their statements that followed the presentation, said as much. You also have the assemblies up for election. This is going to be an extraordinarily low turnout year. And as I said, so the Assembly has to be concerned about any type of tax.
Right.
And it may be less about the millionaire's tax than just the we're raising taxes.
Right. I would
New Jersey
agree with
is, we're a pretty independent, fickle group of people, right? Leave me alone. I mean, it's a very moderate state. So, and again, if you're a small business person, and you employ a couple people, getting to $1 million is not that hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Just one other point on that about Sweeney and the Speaker of the House. And I don't want to put words in either one of their mouths, but I think they're saying, or at least Sweeney is saying, I'm not against tax increases, but we need to fix the pension system.
Right.
We
He
need to fix the health
hasn't
care.
said that very
And
subtly.
if that's on the road to being fixed, and we still need more money,
Right.
that might be where they are.
They both started
But they don't
out,
want to do it now
Yeah.
without fixes.
earlier in the year and last year they were saying, no new taxes. I will not approve any new taxes. And a little bit before the budget speech and afterwards they've said, I will not do any new taxes without some kind of...
But I would say that was
good
probably more the Senate President than the Speaker.
That's correct.
So,
Yep,
and
that's right.
the two of them have a very good relationship, and I don't think the Senate President would put the Speaker in a difficult spot. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to tax incentives, which has become a huge issue in the last half year. New Jersey's tax incentive programs have been in the news, like I said. The governor, in his speech, recommended major changes to the current programs, which expire in June. Under the previous governor's administration, about $8 billion was awarded to mainly large corporations, and there were no caps on the programs. Governor Murphy is looking to shift many of the incentives from big corporations to smaller, innovative companies, startups, and he wants a cap of $400 million on the programs combined. This is what he had to say about it during his budget address.
In my budget address 1 year ago, I called for us to enact a new way in which we provide the tax incentives that help us attract and retain businesses. There are many opinions on our current system of open-ended corporate tax breaks, but here is a simple fact. The potential impact of past corporate tax breaks on corporate business tax collection in the coming fiscal year surpasses $1 billion. And it will remain over $1 billion annually for at least the next 3 fiscal years. Unless we forget, for all of these incentives, before this administration took office, New Jersey was 42nd in job growth and 49th in wage growth. That's out of 50, by the way, while key investments in education and infrastructure, including things like a tunnel under the Hudson River, never happened. Tax incentives, transparent and accountable, smartly devised and strategically deployed, have a vital role to play in a focused economic growth plan. They are a needed step in undertaking structural fiscal reform and restoring middle-class affordability. I am a pro-growth progressive. I want the world's biggest and best technology, clean energy, and life sciences companies to come and expand here. We must be smart and strategic about how we encourage new startups and entrepreneurs, about how we nurture more businesses owned by women, by persons of color, and by veterans, and about how we lead the world in clean energy solutions like offshore wind. We can reclaim and dominate all aspects of the innovation economy. But that's why we need innovative incentive programs. To be pro-business in the 21st century, you need to be agile and creative, just like the businesses we want to grow.
This next question is for both of you, and I'm very interested in what you have to say. I myself am not sure what the answer is, but do you believe tax incentives over the last 8-10 years up until this current year, do you believe that they have been a success, a failure, or somewhere in between?
I think they've been a huge success. I mean, if managed properly and with the right political leadership in terms of the municipality they're emanating from. I mean, you only have to look at what Camden's been able to accomplish. I mean, there's a lot of seed money that's gone in there, and it appears to be working. I mean, there's employment. People are coming downtown. People are living downtown. So you had a combination of forethought and some good political leadership down there. You need that in other places.
Right.
You can't do incentives without political leadership.
Right.
But I think the program's been a huge success. I think what I've tried to read and what the governor is saying is that we just need to make sure that the programs are working properly, and that they're being the incentives are being used properly, and the jobs that are being created are in fact being created. I think the chilling effect here is his proposed cap. That is what I think has made people very nervous. But I think the legislature and the governor can find common ground on making sure the programs are current, and if there's some reforms, let's do it. I think the cap is going to be an issue, and you just have to look at what other states are doing. If we don't do it,
we're
not going to be able to compete.
I thought that he also was emphasizing, let's stop giving these tax incentives to these big semi-evil corporations. I think somebody, either he or somebody in his administration, called them, politically connected corporations, and shifted over to these.
Well, we could spend a couple hours talking how the politics behind that.
Right.
But that kind of rhetoric, I think, is unfortunate around a very serious issue. Right. We want to draw jobs, and we want to keep jobs here. And it's been a good program. It's Christie didn't create it. He might have accelerated it, but other governors have used them. In fact, the governor, Murphy, should take credit, and I know he has, and he should, for bringing back the digital media tax credit to attract the movie industry here. Other states have done it, and North Jersey's seeing a real boom from that tax credit, and that was a modest tax credit. So I think we're on the right track. Everything always needs to you can take a look at these things, and I think he's right to take a look, but I hope he doesn't, really push the cap.
Let me just add another point or two, so I totally agree with. And the competition among the states is so intensive that it almost forces states to get into this unfortunate game of giving credits. But a couple of numbers have been bouncing around. The state has awarded $11 billion of these credits, and therefore that's not a good idea because we're losing revenue. But of that $11 billion, only $700 million so far has been given out to the individuals. And there was a recent report by the state comptroller, and what I took from that report was we're not monitoring this program properly. We haven't traced back to make sure that the company hired who they said they were going to hire, et cetera, et cetera. They can't give you evidence of the impact of it. So
the opponents to all this came out and sort of twisted it, and they said, this is a report that has criticized the tax incentive programs themselves, which was not correct. It's the way they're managed.
Yeah, and then one other statistic that we need. Let's say we've given out $800 billion or whatever the number is. So what has been the positive impact? How much extra dollars through the economy has been generated? And those numbers are not available. So in order to really attack or improve this program, we need to get some more finite information as to the real impact of this. But unfortunately, as Dale suggested, we're in this competition with places moving to North Carolina and South Carolina that have a lot more tax benefits to the companies. Difficult subject.
My next question, well, let me back up a moment. We did another poll last month of our members, and one of the questions was, do you feel that some of these corporate tax incentives, the big corporations, should be shifted to smaller and mid-sized businesses? And a majority said yes, that too much money is being spent on the big corporations and not enough on smaller companies. What do you think about that?
New Jersey, is, as I said earlier, is a much more of a small business state than a large business state. You need a mix, certainly, and the cost of applying for those credits and everything involved with that, the record keeping, becomes a higher expense for a small business. But I think the governor would be on the right track to have some program for small businesses for certain sectors.
Just another observation that's a little off target, but on target, about the corporations, if I could use the verb complaining. You know, 10 years ago, the state collected $3.1 billion of corporate revenue. $3.1 billion, 10 years ago. In the last budget that just finished off, we collected $2.1 billion. So the total payment of corporate taxes to this state over a 10-year period has basically moved from 3 to 2. That might suggest that the incidence of tax isn't that heavy on corporations to begin with. I'm sure we have a few CPAs who might argue against that, but I just throw those numbers out for people to think about it. That is not a big revenue driver for the state of New Jersey, but if we can get something additional through these tax credits, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
There's no suggestion there that companies have left. You're just saying that there's the creative accounting maybe is
correct.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Good point, Dale, because somebody would have, well, that's the reason why the revenues are down. Not true.
Got it. Okay.
One last question on tax incentives, something that's been confusing me. The governor in his budget address said that we're on the hook for $1 billion this year in lost revenues because of these tax incentives and $1 billion for the next 2 years each year. Meanwhile, unless I heard completely wrong, I've heard business leaders say for the last 2 years that over that previous 8 or 10 years, less than $1 billion has actually been paid out. So why all of a sudden are we going from less than $1 billion over 8 years to $3 billion in 3 years? Any idea how or what that's all about? Are they just cashing them in all at one time?
The only observation I would make is what I mentioned earlier. There's an $11 billion number that's identified that credits have been awarded, but only about 600, 700 million has been distributed out.
Right.
So that may be part of the discussion as to what's the difference between awarded and actually paid out.
That's what I thought the governor meant, that there's going to be $1 billion each year over the next 3 years. But he has to,
then somebody is assuming that all that's going to be cashed in. And they're assuming that there's no offsetting benefit to it. So let's say we lost $1 billion, but how much more did we gain by sales tax, income tax, et cetera, et cetera? You need more careful analysis to argue these points properly.
Right. Okay, let's move on to property taxes. And I have some questions here from some of our members. But let me start with my personal main question, which is, during the governor's budget address, he made a big point of the fact that property taxes on average rose less, went up at a lesser rate than they have this year than they have in the previous 8 years. Now, when I heard that, I thought, well, that's probably because the legislature and the governor put a 2% cap on municipal and school board budgets, and they had significant reforms that they made to firefighter and police the arbitration process. Is my reading of that correct? Am I missing something? Did the governor do something to reduce the property tax hike this year?
I would say not materially. The reason why the property tax are down is because of those two issues that you mentioned. That is, we have a cap on spending and we have a cap on arbitration. In fact, I might argue with the percentage that the governor used, prior percentages were always based upon the total tax levy. And the governor used a number that related to residential impact. If you compare it to what it was previously compared to, it would be an increase of 2.2%, which is pretty much what it's been for the past 6 years. There was a lower than 2.2. Right. So I would say, along your line of thinking there, the big impact on taxes has been the caps.
Right.
And the arbitration. Now, the fact that there was more state aid for school districts last year from the governor and this year has have some impact to it. Right. But not the majority of the impact, I would argue.
And I'll just add the political overlay there, and that's, you know, governors, presidents, they get to take credit for the number is what the number is. Yeah. So whether it was his first day in office or, you know, a year and a half, it is what it is. So he gets to stand up and take credit, and most people won't have Rich Keevy's analysis to understand that, well, it was a team effort, not just him.
Okay, let me ask a question or two from one of our members. One member, and I don't have the name here, asked when we were talking about local government spending, and they said the question was, well, isn't a lot of this caused by not the municipality or the school board, but by all the mandates that Trenton issues to local government?
Well, I was on the school board for 9 years, president of our local school board for 9 years, a great adventure. And my judgment is the mandates have impact, but not anywhere near the level that I think that person is suggesting.
Okay.
It is the cost of business. Teacher salaries, smaller class sizes, too many school districts to begin with. In fact, the plan that I was part of with Senate President Sweeney would suggest reducing the number of these school districts. Instead of having a K through 3 and a K through 4, we combine them into a regional school district. That would reduce the number of school districts down to 350. And educators would argue, and that makes for a better educational program.
Right.
So instead of having a K through 3 and a K through 7 going into the same regional district with different curriculums at the lower levels, we'll all have one consolidated.
Right, and that came out of the Path to Progress
That's
report.
correct, yeah. So I don't think it's the mandates, frankly, although I'm sure there's some impact.
Right. Let me go through a few other questions here, and they don't all directly relate to what we discussed. Here's a good one. This is from Stacy. The Fed, that is the Federal Reserve, says that the national economy is slowing. New Jersey lost jobs in February. What will be the impact of a slowing economy on budget negotiations?
Not good. So, and I think, however, we won't know that by June 30th. Revenue estimating is very tricky. We know some information. We know current data. A big date's going to be April 15th. There's a lot of money assumed to be into the budget that isn't there yet. I'm hoping, the governor is hoping, I'm sure everybody's hoping that the numbers that are estimated for the current year materialize. And then, if that person is correct, that has an impact on the next year's budget. So we don't know. Most people would suggest the economy is due for a turndown.
Right.
And therefore, what does that do to the budget? Now, to the governor's credit, there is $1 billion projected surplus. But that assumes, A, that we have the millionaire's tax, and B, that all the revenue estimates in the budget are accurate, which we don't know yet.
Right.
And we'll have a better feeling of that, I would say, on May 1st.
Okay. Here is it's not something we've discussed, but it's a very hot issue. This is from Mr. Anonymous.
I get him on my phone at home all the time.
Do you think marijuana will be legalized? And if so, how do you think it impacts this discussion? I.e., how much revenue would it create?
I don't know whether Dale has a better fix on it, but I have no idea whether it's going to pass, and I think the revenue is marginal.
Yeah.
I think that one of the unfortunate parts of this conversation about marijuana, is that when it was first messaged by the governor, it was discussed in the context of revenue.
Right.
I think many legislators and policymakers would have preferred to talk about it in the therapeutic benefit to it, the ability of a mature society to handle it, and then, oh, by the way, you know, it can bring in some revenue. So I think they've never recovered from that conversation, and that's what's playing out today, because on March 25th, the legislature may or may not pass the legislation. So, and I happen to agree with Rich, and he probably more insightful than I would be from a numbers standpoint, but I'm not sure that it's going to be the cash cow that people think.
Right. I agree with that, and I have to say, when they first started this whole discussion a year ago or whatever, like you said, all they talked about was revenues, and I kept thinking, gee, should there be a whole big argument or discussion over the moral and the physical, you know, and sociological impact of this? But it was all revenue. And I was like, wow, I guess things have really advanced since I was growing up, where when people spoke of marijuana, it was from a moral and sociological perspective. So,
I think that's what it's in our house between my wife and I, is the morality of it.
Right.
We don't particularly care about the revenue, frankly.
Right.
I mean, listen, I think it does pass. It may not pass on the 25th of March. They're still working through that. But ultimately, it will be legalized. And New Jersey will be the first state that actually legalized it through the legislature and the governor versus initiative and a referendum.
So here's another question. Oh, it's from Mr. Anonymous again. Will New Jersey have to endure an economic and political calamity before lawmakers are willing to make hard choices about the pension system?
I think Mr. Anonymous should run for office. I mean, it sounds like he feels pretty strongly about the issue. I don't know. It is, if it's March or April, we're talking about the budget and pension. It's a perennial, it's an annual issue. It's always the conversation. As I said earlier in the broadcast, people in Treasury, they know all the solutions. It comes back to political will.
Right. That's always been my take on it. So we are just about out of time. I want to thank both of you for being here today. I certainly got a lot out of it. I'm sure our members did. And I'd like to have you back on at, some other future show. Maybe next year's budget.
Or what happens on July 1st might be more.
Yeah. We can do post-mortem. Is that what it's called? Remember, if you have a colleague who missed today's broadcast, we will be replaying it twice for CPE credit, March 27th at noon and April 1st at noon. Our next two editions of Issues Watch Live will be broadcast from the Society's convention and expo in June. If you're attending the convention, you can register for the free broadcast at the link on your screen. In the meantime, check njcpa.org, NJCPA Pulse, the Open Forum, and the Issue Watch podcast for updates on legislative and professional and regulatory issues. And thank you for watching.